a very interesting pick by Donald Trump for Department of Labor. He found one of the only in existence somewhat pro-union Republicans. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. So it's a moderate Congresswoman. She just actually lost narrowly re-election in the state of Oregon. Her name is Lori Chavez DeRemer. I might be saying that wrong. I'm sorry if I am. But basically, I had never heard of her. The one thing that makes her noteworthy is she did actually vote. She was one of very few who voted in favor of the PRO Act, which is pro-union legislation in the House. And the other thing that is noteworthy about her is that Sean O'Brien, who is the president of the Teamsters Union, who spoke at the RNC and decided to keep his union out of the endorsement game whatsoever, which was taken as a huge victory by Trump and his side. This is the candidate that he was ultimately pushing for this job. So, it's quite a remarkable shift to have for Trump specifically, who has been a union buster his whole life, to have someone who's remotely pro-union put into this position. And, I think it's sort of like a payoff for Sean O'Brien, who was tweeting about this. Let's put this up on the screen. He says, thank you, Donald Trump, for putting American workers first by nominating Lori Chavez DeRemer for U.S. Labor Secretary. Nearly a year ago, you joined us for Teamsters Roundtable and pledged to listen to workers and find common ground to protect and respect labor in America. You put words into action. Now let's grow wages and improve working conditions nationwide. Congratulations on your nomination, et cetera, et cetera. So he's certainly taking a victory lap with this. And, for me, Emily, it's both really consequential. Listen, for the labor movement, which you guys know is one of my key priorities, the labor union used to have bipartisan support, like in the New Deal era, and still does if you go into state legislatures in places that are more like pro-union friendly. I can speak to the Kentucky legislature still had, at least last I checked, some Republicans who would be pro-labor, pro-union. So it is a flavor that did exist, but it is better for the labor movement when you have bipartisan support, because one of the problems with the union movement is that since Republicans became just like 100% ideologically aligned against it, you had a raft of legislation that was passed in states that made it more and more difficult to organize. You had an effort to paint unions as just being sort of like plants for the Democratic Party. So overall, it's really good to have some bipartisanship within the union movement. But I also don't want to overstate what this means, because, if you were really serious about advancing labor rights in the way that the Biden administration actually was, you would keep, for example, Jennifer Abruzzo in as general counsel at the National Labor Relations Board. You would reverse some of the incredibly hostile actions that the Trump administration took last time they were in office. The Biden administration, they ramped up their enforcement of minimum wage, overtime, worker safety. Trump has been on the other side of many of those. And one of the most consequential pieces is that the Biden administration has pushed to make it easier to classify contractors, like those Amazon drivers, as employees, which has really aided union drives specifically that apply to the Teamsters. And there's no real indication that the Trump administration plans to continue in that direction. So while it is significant, I also don't want to make too much of it, because ultimately it matters what this Department of Labor does once the rubber hits the road.
This is truly significant. I mean, there's just no other way to look at it, because as some of these cabinet nominations have come out, there's been tons of pressure, as you know, on Sean O'Brien, people saying, look at this, you bet on the wrong horse and here's what you're getting, because various of these nominees have come from, the conservative movement, somebody like Russ Vought, for example, who maybe think differently about unions post-Trump, but definitely before Trump, were not in favor of any of this at all.
Yes.
And we're much more aligned openly, proudly with the business community than with unions. And so this could have been somebody, remember, Donald Trump's first nomination, his first labor secretary was Alex Acosta, the guy who approved the deal for Jeffrey Epstein. Right. This could have been someone that was very, very hostile to organized labor. No matter what Donald Trump said on the campaign trail, it's just the selection of people to go from. It's just very, very difficult to actually align yourself in that way. And for him to align himself with Sean O'Brien here, this is massive. This is truly massive. The labor secretary is in charge of so much policy. It's not just what goes through Congress. Like the labor secretary is extremely consequential for the day-to-day policies of, or the day-to-day practices of what happens in the business world. This is a huge, huge deal for a Republican president.
Yeah, so I'm no doubt about that. On the other hand, there are many contradictory signs in terms of the posture towards unions within this administration. Yeah. We can put this next piece up on the screen. So one of the biggest problems, Rokana here tweeting, what could be a bigger betrayal of working class voters than to dismantle an FDR-created agency, that'd be the National Labor Relations Board, that protects unions and workers from exploitation. And he links to a Washington Post article here about the efforts by Elon Musk and supported by, many Trump allies to deem the National Labor Relations Board unconstitutional, which would be kind of a death blow for union organizing. So Elon has been very involved in this. Amazon, SpaceX, they've all argued in federal court. Starbucks, they've all argued in federal court that the NLRB is unconstitutional. They also write in this article that Trump's presidential administration is poised to oversee major cuts to the powers of the National Labor Relations Board, and firing the Democratic members of that board. And I know this can seem really in the weeds, but we've covered it extensively here. So if you've been watching the show for a while, you'll know some of this. This wave of grassroots union organizing that we've seen at places like Amazon, at places which is represented by parts of the organizing driver being led by the Teamsters, at places like Starbucks. The workers get all the credit for doing the work and taking a risk and all of that, but it also was really dramatically enabled by a pretty aggressively pro-worker National Labor Relations Board, the general counsel of which, her name is Jennifer Abruzzo. She is very likely to be fired by the Trump administration. I don't think there hasn't been the whole Lena Khan conversation. Yeah. She hasn't been conversation. She hasn't been made central to this, but she really should be, because if you actually care about expanding union rights, this is someone who has done incredible work. The Biden administration with Jennifer Abruzzo has also worked to ban these meetings that they force workers to go into to hear anti-union propaganda. There have been very important decisions made about even the way in which the Starbucks organizing could unfold. And so that's been super consequential. And with Elon Musk in here this is a guy that brags about firing striking workers that Trump was like, yay, way to go, good job. Yeah. With Elon Musk in here as an incredible influence who thinks unions should just basically be illegal, if you're a labor supporter as I am, I don't think you should be resting easy by the fact that they picked, this congresswoman who supported the PRO Act to head the agency. There's still a lot of huge questions about what the orientation is actually going to be. And of course, in the first Trump administration, he was aggressively anti-union, which fits with his business career, in which he also was a notable union buster. Yeah,
this is one of the questions that I asked my friends who are sort of working in people who are seen these negotiations behind the scenes in the off season, as you put it earlier in the show, to see what a new Republican administration with their fantasy policies in place. I've asked them, do you have enough people to staff a potentially pro-labor department under Donald Trump? All of those middle positions, right, which are also extremely consequential. Who are you going to put in them that's not from the Coke world, truly, right, that didn't grow up in that time and doesn't come with some of those predispositions? And I don't know that can happen. And so it means that maybe a lot of careers will be protected at the Labor Department. I don't know.
Maybe, but the other thing is okay, so you give Sean O'Brien what he wants here, mm-hmm, and you have Elon and Vivek coming in to basically take an axe to the whole agency.
Although they don't have any power.
But
they'll want to.
Yes, and Russ Vought and others have this theory that you can make unilateral cuts without having to go through Congress. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's very possible that you have her at the head of what ends up being sort of a skeleton agency that, even if it wants to, it doesn't really have the power. Already, the Department of Labor and the National Labor Relations Board does not have sufficient staffing to be able to handle worker grievances and disputes and elections in a timely manner. It's already stretched incredibly thin, especially as there's been a significant increase in union organizing activity. So it's entirely possible you end up with a figurehead overseeing what's effectively a skeletal agency that, basically gives gives a nod to the union voters and to Sean O'Brien and people who supported Donald Trump, but isn't actually effectively able to protect workers' rights, because that does take bureaucrats and people in positions who can, do the work to make sure those rights are protected.
Somehow the bureaucrats at the NLRB had enough time to subpoena me over a joke tweet that my then boss said 5 years ago. Yeah, maybe I'll tell the story about that one time, but it's all been reported. It was it was like a joke tweet about like whether employees at the Federalists would unionize. You could Google it, but they did just subpoena the women, and they somehow found the time to do that. It was really fun.
They're protecting your rights, Emily. They're
protecting your rights. But we can put this Dan Marin's tweet up because I think it's really interesting. And Krystal, I know you and I disagree on this. I've always been frustrated about the PRO Act itself being sort of the litmus test. This is kind of conservative world freaking out about the Chavez de Raymer nomination because, as Dan points out in one of his posts, even some Democrats have issues with the PRO Act, forcing companies to treat all gig workers as employees, and we could debate that. I think maybe we have like a couple years ago, but it's significant even that as some Democrats have issues with the PRO Act, this one Republican was like, hey, I'm getting on board with the PRO Act, even though corporate Dems are uncomfortable with the PRO Act.
Well, at the Senate level, I think every Democrat except for Mark Kelly and Kyrsten Sinema supported it.
Yeah.
So it was pretty unanimous. And then once Mark Kelly started getting floated for being the vice presidential pick, he also was like, I support the PRO Act. But hey, listen, I'm happy to go back to card check, which was what was being pushed, the Employee Free Choice Act, which was what was being pushed under the Obama administration. We can go ahead forward with some of these tweets so we can show there's, real freak out happening. Here you say a Republican labor secretary supports the anti-worker PRO Act. It would be a very bad start for Trump. Arguably the worst bill in Congress. Anti-freelancer, anti-franchisee, anti-secret ballot, anti-worker. Okay, go ahead to the next one. If you think union leadership is in step with the union rank and file, you've learned absolutely nothing. Union members didn't vote for Trump to end right to work and empower teachers' unions. They just wanted lower prices. So this is an interesting argument. That one of like, no, they knew that Trump is anti-union and they voted for him anyway. Yeah. That's an interesting take, and maybe correct. I don't know.
Partially, yeah.
It could be correct, yeah. And then this person says, Lori Chavez de Raymer co-sponsored the PRO Act. That's all I need to know. I don't think they mean that as a positive, Emily. So
there's so many people like that, though. I mean, truly, like this is the Koch brothers were the engine of the. Let's say the labor nonprofit movement on the right. And it's not as though people needed to be paid by the Koch brothers to have anti-union positions. It was just that the conservative movement was reflectively in support of business over organized labor.
Yeah.
It was part of the ideology that we trust the business more than we trust the government. And I mean, it's baked into the cake here. And so most of the people in the conservative movement who focus on labor issues have those takes. And there are some people like Orrin Cass who have been toiling in the trenches and getting trashed by guys like that to come up with a slightly more pro-worker policy agenda for the Republican Party. And even when they step a little bit out of line, they get, you see Sagar get it, I get it. Like it's not a big deal, but for people like Orrin, who are the figureheads of this, like they make it impossible to get money from people who want the conservative movement to have like a slightly more pro-worker agenda. If you take any money from the left, you'll just get trashed. And so that reaction. The pressure is going to be on. There's just no question about it.
Yeah, she'll get confirmed because I think quite a number of Democrats will actually vote for her too because of the available choices. Like you are not going to get a more pro-labor Department of Labor head than she is. But it'll be interesting whether there are any Republicans who vote against her. The super business like Chamber of Commerce types are going to be under pressure probably. Although maybe they don't really even apply pressure because they know it's a bit of a lost cause with Democrats being willing to vote for her. So I'll just say for my part, I do think it's obviously noteworthy and an important break from the Trump administration last time around and from Republican orthodoxy in general. I think it is incredibly positive for the labor movement if there are some Republican bipartisan support for unions, no doubt about it. I'm going to need to see a lot more before I'm convinced that Donald Trump is going to be remotely good for labor organizing, given his personal history and given the way the first administration unfolded, and given that probably the most powerful person, advisor to Donald Trump right now, is Elon Musk, who is vehemently opposed to unions even like existing in the world.
Mm-hmm. No, it's an entirely fair point. And the one thing that I always say to people on the right about this. Is I grew up in a split household. My dad was a union, my mom worked in HR, so it was like a little. Yeah.
That's funny.
But my point is, basically, if you don't trust corporations, if you think that there's like a moral vacuum in corporate America and that these executives are bad and that's what was driving a lot of DEI, well, imagine how they actually treat their workers. Imagine, like, take that and apply it. What if they are suddenly adopting all of this like DEI bullshit and it's reflective of them having bad character and being cynical corporate losers? Then imagine how they treat their workers. Like, just take that and say, if you believe this is reflective of moral rot inside of corporate America, then imagine working for Amazon.
Yeah.
It's really simple.
Yeah.
It translates right across the board.
Yeah.
So
such a great point.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.